Hello, my beautiful swans. My name is Mina, and welcome back to my channel. Welcome if this is your first time. Today, we're going to be talking about ballerina fashion and balletcore, which have been slowly gaining popularity over the past year or so, I would say. A couple of articles have predicted that the whole ballerina aesthetic is going to be one of 2022's biggest trends, so we'll see. In this video, I'll be talking about the history of ballet fashion, the inspirations, the elements of the aesthetic, and the social criticisms and themes that are kind of pulled into it. So, balletcore is an interesting aesthetic category because throughout the 20th century, ballet has been a huge inspiration in fashion and vice versa. Ballet first emerged as an elite form of art in the early 1900s, or really the 1930s. Well, I guess if you want to get technical, it was an aristocratic art form that dates back to Italian Renaissance courts in the 15th century. Dance historian Jennifer Homans told NPR that ballet's aristocratic roots can even be seen today.
If you have a reverence, a bow, which is still performed today in classical ballet, both in dances but also at the end of most dance classes. That's the same bow that you would see in a painting of courtiers leaving their king, and how far they bow, how deep they go was a sign of respect for the monarch or for the person they were addressing.
Louis XIV of France then coded the dance into an artistic institution when he opened the Académie Royale de Danse in 1661, with the aim of training professional dancers to entertain his court. Ballet was historically a male-dominated art as well, with men playing both female and male character roles on the stage. Ballet didn't become associated with femininity till around the 1830s, and there's a couple reasons for why that happened. Ilyana Karthas writes that the privatization of ballet, the sexual commodification of dancers, an increasingly male audience, the invention of the point shoe, and romantic themes of supernatural exotic folklore all led to the feminization of ballet. Homans also adds that the French Revolution brewed this hostile attitude towards aristocratic art forms, including the opera, and the men performing in these elite art forms were gradually becoming more unpopular in the eyes of society. Ballet's gender separation grew so severe by the end of the 19th century that critics believed male dancing was this degrading act. One critic, Jules Janin, wrote, "Under no circumstances do I recognize a man's right to dance in public." Other than the negative social implications with just having certain activities designated for men and certain activities designated for women, there was an even more sinister consequence of this new feminization of ballet. The line between sex and dance has always been a little blurry throughout history, but in the 19th century, there was an epidemic of prostitution at the Paris Opera Ballet. So women entered the ballet as young children, and they would train pretty aggressively and militaristically until they could snag a position in the corps de ballet. These women were usually lower class, called insulting names like petites rats, and were vulnerable to the sexual advances of abonnés, aka wealthy male patrons of the opera. These patrons were allowed backstage access so that they could watch and socialize with the dancers who were practicing. These abonnés were so powerful that they could influence who got a coveted role in the ballet production and who got fired from the ballet altogether. So these girls were essentially forced to play nice with these patrons if they wanted to stay out of poverty. This atmosphere was so prevalent in the ballet world that historian Lorraine Coons even said that all dancers who got leading roles with or without the help of a rich patron were looked down upon in society and stereotyped as being a sex worker. On the costume front, there were some major ballet costume changes throughout the 19th century. In the production of La Sylphide, which premiered at the Paris Opera House in 1832, Swedish ballerina Maria Taglioni wore a white-fitted bodice and a diaphanous calf-length tulle skirt, which was a shorter version of the dress in vogue in the 1830s, paired with satin pumps that lace at the calf. The term tutu, which is essentially what she's wearing, comes from the slang term cuckoo, which means butt, which is what people in the cheap seats in the front could see. Taglioni is credited as pioneering the on-point technique and subsequently wearing the first point shoe. It wasn't until the early 20th century that ballet started to get a positive report among society. Ilyana Karthas explains this change as correlating with the rediscovery of the human body during the 1920s physical culture craze. She writes, this era promoted images of femininity and masculinity within a new context of the physical body, athleticism and exercise, hygiene, and the general health of the nation. And subsequently, the male dancer made a return as his muscular body was deemed a representation of good health and morality. Patricia Mears, deputy director at the museum at FIT, credits the Ballet Russe, a ballet company founded in Paris and produced by Russian-born Sergei Diaghilev, as first popularizing ballet as a source of inspiration for fashion designers. On a more general note, the Ballet Russe is often attributed as being like the most influential 20th century ballet company due to their many collaborations with prominent and talented artists of the time. Diaghilev, for instance, commissioned works from composers including Debussy and Stravinsky, artists such as Picasso and Matisse, and on the fashion front, designers including Coco Chanel and Paul Poiret. The success of the Ballet Russe can also in part be attributed to the general Orientalism craze spreading through the West during this time, which you can see in Paul Poiret's harem skirts and jewel tone colors. Coco Chanel even created a couture collection inspired by traditional Russian clothing in 1923. Mears says that the Ballet Russe essentially exported a fantasy of Russia to a European audience. Later in the 1930s, ballet's influence in fashion continued on. For example, the artist Christian Berard's tulle-skirted costume for the 1932 Cotillon Ballet production is theorized as being the inspiration for Chanel's 1930s tulle gowns. And while the color pink is the color most often associated with ballet, the production of Sleeping Beauty showcased bluebird blue and lilac costumes. Elsa Schiaparelli's second signature color, Sleeping Blue, took inspiration from this production. So I'm just going to show you guys a couple of my favorite ballet-inspired couture that was produced in the last 100 years. So this dress was designed by Cristobal Balenciaga for Hattie Carnegie in 1950. As you can see, it's made of pink silk, tulle, and satin with silver metal embroidery. I just love the shape of the bodice and how the tulle kind of rains down in front of the peplum. This voluminous tulle gown was designed by Christian Dior in 1947. I love the gigantic ribbon around the waist that trails behind with the flowers attached. Dior used a lot of tulle in his designs, which definitely give a full-skirted ballerina element. For more contemporary examples, I liked this dress from the Valentino Couture Spring 2014 collection, but the entire collection is inspired by ballerina silhouettes and textures. I also love Marchese's Spring 2016 ready-to-wear collection, especially this dress that has these swan wing details at the bodice. I mean, you could really argue that any dress or collection that uses tulle has been inspired by the legacy of ballet costume. I also really liked Erdem's Fall-Winter 2021 collection, which I found really inventive. Erdem drew inspiration from the backstage of the theater, especially in how dancers would dash around half-dressed in their stage costumes and half-dressed in their everyday attire. So while we can see how ballet has inspired fashion a lot, Balletcore is something a little different. In the year 2022, there seems to be two types of ballet-inspired fashion. The first being inspired by the romantic performance costumes championed by Marie Taglioni, and the other being inspired by casual rehearsal attire. I noticed that a lot of the Balletcore girls lean more towards the latter, probably because it's more wearable for every day, and not all of us can afford a closet of Simone Rocha tulle skirts.
Oh, how I wish, though.
Common elements I've seen in the style are arm and leg warmers, tights, flared leggings, bodysuits, hair ribbons, wrap tops and skirts, subversive basics, knit sweaters, silk slip dresses, earmuffs, headphones. Yes, headphones is a trend. Ballet flats, Uggs, tight hair buns, pearls, rose-scented perfume, Dior lip glow, and the colors pink, white, nude, and black. There is a lot of crossover between the coquette aesthetic, which is a controversial subculture that is, in the simplest description possible, the romanticization of girlhood. This overlap does make sense because there is a heavy association between girlhood and ballet, what with the Angelina Ballerina and Barbie ballet movies in the media. I would also say that a good number of girls in the US have at one point in their lives been enrolled in a ballet class by their mom, me included. Inspirations and aesthetic elements include Black Swan, Lily Rose Depp, Elle Fanning, Audrey Hepburn, Dior, Miu Miu, Blue Marine, Angels, Bows, cigarettes, and lots of photos of just leg or just mouth. So let's unpack some of these things. I kind of already talked about the tutu earlier, so I want to just talk about the leotard for a second. But the leotard was actually created in the 19th century by the French acrobat Jules Leotard. But during the 19th century and for the early half of the 20th century, leotards were mostly worn by gymnasts and circus performers. That's not to say that no dancers wore them. The Ballet Russe actually wore a type of one-piece suit on stage for their production of Ode in 1928. But original leotards were made of cotton and other natural fibers, so they would kind of like bunch up and sag and just look kind of bad.
It was supposed to give, but it did not give what needed to be gave to the highest of giving.
Then in 1943, Harper's Bazaar published the leotard idea, which was based on designs created by Mildred Orrick. Fashion editor Diana Vreeland was hoping to introduce the styles to young women, particularly college girls, since sportswear was dominating fashion at the time. She worked with renowned sportswear designer Claire McCardle and Townley Sports to create variations of the leotard theme, but the designs were ultimately too expensive to manufacture. In the 1960s, we got a really important fabric innovation. DuPont's chemist Joe Shivers invented Lycra. Well, Lycra was technically patented in 1958, but it was introduced to the public in 1962. The original goal for creating Lycra was to create a better, more comfortable fitting girdle, which was a popular women's undergarment for the time. Lycra was a hit at first, but sales started to fall as the new generation of teenage girls stopped purchasing girdles due to the fashion rebellion happening in the 60s. And you know how the saying goes, someone's trash is someone else's treasure. I don't know. You know how it goes. But basically, the underwear industry's trash was the dancewear industry's treasure. Okay, I totally fumbled that one, but you got what I mean. Especially with the growing fitness craze, Lycra became an incredibly important material in dancewear from the 70s onward. I found an article published in 1976 covering the famous ballerina Margot Fontaine's new leotard designs, which were made of a Lycra polyester and cotton blend. Under the ballet aesthetic, most of the girls participating in it opt for the bodysuit over the leotard. Bodysuits are less skin tight and usually made of softer knit fabrics because they're not specifically a sportswear garment. This makes sense because bodysuits are more wearable unless you have to pee, and which they are equally as unwearable as leotards. But yeah, they're generally more casual with the same visual silhouette as the leotard. The ballet slipper, which is also a mainstay of the Balletcore look, was catapulted into mainstream popularity by Russian prima ballerina Anna Pavlova. She had very high, unstable arches, so to fix her form when she was on point, she added leather soles inside her point shoes and hardened the box for more support. She made her first trip to the US in 1910, and while there she requested shoes from the Metropolitan Opera shoemaker Salvador Capezio, and her positive review helped launch Capezio's future success. However, it wasn't until 1941 that the ballet flat became a mainstream fashion staple. At this time, designer Claire McCardle commissioned Capezio for ballet flats to feature with her fashion collection. Subsequently, department stores like Neiman Marcus and Lord & Taylor purchased and promoted Capezio footwear, leading Capezio to be made the cover of Vogue in 1949. Nowadays, I think people are gravitating towards the ballet flat because it combines like two popular trends at the moment. The first is, of course, like what this entire video is about, the fact that ballet flats have their origins in ballet aesthetics. And ballet flats were also a common shoe preference among 60s era French girls. Brigitte Bardot famously wore ballet slippers designed by Rose Repetto in the 1956 film And God Created Woman. Likewise, European it girls Anna Karenina, Audrey Hepburn, and Jean Seberg, I don't think I pronounced that right, Jean Seberg also sported the ballet flat, adding to its reputation of casual glamour. So, why is Balletcore so popular right now, or at least growing in popularity? According to stylist Madeline Jones, I see the ballet all day movement as the natural evolution from athleisure. It's part of a greater realization that, come what may, we've officially decided comfort is enough any day of the week. Now with the ballet movement, there's a way to give purpose and elevate from athleisure to something almost theatrical. So even when you're putting on leggings, a wrap cardigan, or a corset, it still feels like you're dressing up, but not overdressed. I definitely agree with Madeline. I also think that the ballerina trend is a way of incorporating subversive basics into an aesthetic. Subversive basics, for anyone who isn't familiar with the term, is like a futuristic approach to basics. Think of tank tops and loungewear that include details like cutouts, straps, and layering. It's been super popular as its own design category in the past few years and is credited as being a revival of the 90s cutout trends championed by Thierry Mugler. I've noticed brands like Morosky Peach and No Dress go so far as to even incorporate ballet-esque elements into their subversive basic designs. I'm not gonna lie, I actually really do like Balletcore, though I think that it can get boring and old very quickly for people who aren't actually dancers because there's very little variation to what I've seen in this aesthetic. I do like it in small doses because, like Madeline says, it kind of offers a feminine flair to the athleisure trend.
Spoiler alert.
I don't know if you can tell this from my personality, but I really don't like athleisure personally. I don't go around judging people for wearing athleisure on the streets, but I just don't like the feeling of wearing running tights when I'm out and about because I just feel like I'm not ready for the day. That's just me. So the ballet aesthetic is a way for me to comfortably move around, especially when I'm just going to class or running errands, while still feeling like myself. So with that said, I think a major reason why it's popular right now is because of the hyperfemininity associated with ballet, which has its pros and cons. English professor... Why did I say it like that? English professor Jennifer M. Miskek argues that the very principles that define ballet as an art form contain oppressive ideologies about femininity. She says, ballet is the perfect space for ideal femininity. Thin bodies, frilly skirts, and speechlessness. Graceful movements making it all look easy while hiding the pain. Physical anguish for beauty. Dance historian Marion Kant challenges this assertion, writing, "If you ask someone what most clearly symbolizes ballet, she will probably answer the skirt and the point shoe." Kant then asks, why this cult of the costume? Has ballet no message? Is it merely a flighty art form of beautiful lines of flowing skirts and satin shoes? The reality is that ballet is actually a very serious art form, and its meaning has been kind of muddled and appropriated by TikTok and Pinterest users. But this isn't new. Critics have been arguing for a long time about how letting any little girl wear a tutu devalues ballet as a serious profession. As Chazin Benahum writes, wearing a tutu signifies that the dancer has trained vigorously and seriously in order to perform the romantic and classical repertoire. So when an aesthetic like Balletcore is so hyper-focused on the aesthetic elements of a culture, it can actually feed into this notion that princess and ballerina culture are intrinsically vapid girl hobbies. For example, Mariko Turk comments on how the movie Barbie in the Pink Shoes completely disregards ballet's basic principle. For example, when the character Kristen declares she's just going to let her feet do her own thing instead of listening to her ballet teacher's instructions.
This is not the choreography we rehearsed. I don't mean to, Madame Natasha. I just get caught up in the music and the flow and my feet just do their own thing.
Turk writes, ballet, when packaged and sold to girls, is often emptied of its own history and artistic meanings in order to promote princess culture's narrow visions of girlhood. But, we can also ask, what's so wrong about liking feminine and girly things to begin with? What's so wrong with liking pink and soft things? I don't think there's inherently anything wrong with that. I myself am a girl's girl. I really like roses and makeup and frilly things and dresses, etc., etc. So, I might be biased, but I do, of course, still admit that there is this scary side of the aesthetic, especially when we get into the coquette girls who often romanticize abusive relationships with older men and whose trad wife desires kind of infringe on internalized misogyny. But I think as long as you like girly things without falling into the Lolita entrappings, there's nothing wrong with that. I also think our desire for femininity has heightened because of the plague years when a lot of us fell out of the habit of doing our makeup and hair and getting dressed every day. As Pat Kirkham has pointed out in her analysis of dress in Charles Crichton's film Dance Hall in 1950, a classical ballroom gown-like dream dress for dancing would be symbolic of an elegant romantic mode of femininity. By wearing it, the female character and the female viewer alike could experience the transcendence of fairy tale-like fantasy into reality. But, Balletcore does have its downsides. When I was going through Pinterest boards of this aesthetic, I couldn't help but wonder, why are all the photos of white women? And look, I don't think it's a shock to anyone that ballet has a very racist history. The New York Times published an article in 2018 on how a lot of black and brown ballerinas had to dye their own pointe shoes because they couldn't find shoes that matched their skin tone easily. In these photos, dancer Ingrid Silva is shown dyeing her shoes with Black Opal's Ebony Brown, which costs about $11 a bottle, and one bottle can dye 3 shoes. She goes through an average of 2 pairs of shoes a week, which means she would spend $770 a year on makeup for shoes, which is a significant amount of money considering dancers' low pay. But despite all these entry barriers, ballerinas of color have still been, forging their way through, and it would be nice if the Pinterest girls could reflect these changing times rather than just reposting the same 3 photos of Elle Fanning, as much as I love her. Misty Copeland, for instance, was the first Black woman to be promoted to principal dancer at the American Ballet Theater. There was also Maria Tallchief, who is considered to be the first major American prima ballerina. She was indigenous and was active from the 1940s to the 1960s. So I don't know, if racist Bridget Bardot can make it to the mood board, surely Maria can too. And of course, I don't want to say that there's no people of color participating in this trend, because there definitely are. For example, my friend Camry, who's a literal ballerina and has been doing the pink thing since she was out of the womb. And if you know where to look on Pinterest, you can definitely find a lot of photos of feminine people of color. But I do think it's kind of concerning that a lot of Balletcore girls are just happy reposting other white girls, which further normalizes the lack of diversity in the ballet scene. Okay, for this section, I do want to add a trigger warning because I think it's kind of impossible to talk about this subject conclusively without mentioning the fact that eating disorders are a really big problem. So if you're sensitive to this topic, please tread carefully ahead. Or alternatively, if you just want to skip this section altogether, here's the timestamp for where you can skip ahead to. Another problematic aspect of this aesthetic is the glorification of the waif body, which is just like the skinny, youthful, petite body. It's not a problem to have this body type. Like, I literally have this body type. But in my 24 hours of intense research for this video, I've just come across so many gatekeepers who are blatantly fat phobic. And it's just like very frustrating and kind of darkly ironic how actual ballerinas have been talking about the toxic body image issues in this industry for a long time now. And now they're just a bunch of people who just like the style. Most of them do not actually dance, and that's totally fine, but they just like the style and they're gatekeeping it. Misty Copeland even wrote an entire article on her experience dealing with an eating disorder catalyzed by the industry. She says that after injuring herself during a rehearsal, her doctor put her on the pill to help strengthen her bones, because at the time she was so skinny, she wasn't menstruating, and she was skinny not because she had an eating disorder, but because she was burning so many calories a day. It ended up taking a year for her to recover, and during that year, the pill helped her gain cleavage and a bit of a stomach, which then led her company to pull her into a meeting and tell her that she needed to lose weight. Another example, in her book, Dancing on My Grave, former dancer Gelsey Kirkland writes about her experience studying under George Balanchine, one of the most influential ballet choreographers of the 20th century. She said that one day he halted class and approached her for a physical inspection. With his knuckles, he thumped on my sternum and down my ribcage, clucking his tongue and remarking, "Must see the bones." I was less than 100 pounds even then. He did not merely say, "Eat less," he said repeatedly, "Eat nothing." I know this is only a part of the community, but it is like this resilient part of the community, like resilient enough for me to come across many people who subscribe to this kind of rhetoric, which is very concerning. And people in this part of the community not only body shame, but they also glorify mental illness in the same vein as the Tumblr sad girls of 2014, which I discussed in my last video. Like, I don't know. I came across a TikTok video the other day, and I'm not going to share it with you because I don't want this person to get cyberbullied or anything. But she said, "Women who relate to Nina Sayers and men who relate to Patrick Bateman are made for each other." Like, girl, what? You wanting to be Natalie Portman from Black Swan is your own prerogative. That is very questionable, but is your own prerogative. But Patrick Bateman, the serial killer from American Psycho, yeah, I think we should all agree he deserves jail.
Where did you get that overnight bag?
Jean-Paul Gaultier.
It's giving cute but psycho. It's giving Harley Quinn and Joker OTP. So in conclusion, I like the aesthetic. I like the aesthetic elements of the aesthetic. But I do think anyone who participates in it or who wants to participate in it should be cautious of the unhealthy rhetoric that is being pushed in some circles of this subculture, because it's very concerning and everyone should just look out for their own mental health. So, okay, that's all I have for today. Thank you so much for sticking around. Let me know in the comments what you think of Balletcore or just ballerina inspired fashion in general. And yeah, I'll see you next time. I hope you have a lovely rest of your day. Bye-bye.